Okay, so this lesson is about trigonometric cofunctions. Cofunction identities are trigonometric identities that show a relationship between these three pairs. One is sine and cosine is a pair for cofunctions. Cosecant and secant is a pair of cofunctions. And tangent and cotangent is a pair of cofunctions. It's not the same as reciprocal functions. Cofunctions belong together because the two angles are complementary. When the two angles are complementary, if you remember what complementary is, it means they add to 90 degrees. So if I write out the cofunction identities, I have first the sine and the cosine pair. So if I have sine of an angle, it would equal the cosine of 90 minus that angle. Because if I have an angle of A, whatever that value might be, the angle for cosine has to be 90 minus A, because if I took those two values, they would have to add up to 90. So that's why I have 90 minus A over here. And I could do the reverse of that. I could do cosine of some angle, we'll say B, is equal to the sine of 90 minus the angle B. And that's also true for radians. Since I know pi is equal to 180, if I want to know what 90 is equal to, 180 divided by 2 will give me 90. So it would work the same for pi divided by 2 would give me 90. So I could also say sine of A is equal to the cosine of pi over 2 minus angle A, since pi over 2 and 90 is the same. And that works for everything. So I'd have the cosine of B would be the same thing as sine of, not 90, pi over 2 minus B. I also have the pair of cosecant and secant. So the cosecant of some angle, we could say theta, is the secant of 90 minus theta, or pi over 2 minus theta. And I could also have the reverse of it, secant of, we could say x. Doesn't really matter what the variable is. It's just representing an angle. So this one would be secant of x is equal to the cosecant of 90 minus x, or pi over 2 minus x. And the last one is tangent and cotangent. So the tangent of D is equal to the cotangent of 90 minus d. And the reverse of that would be the cotangent of theta equals the tangent of 90 minus theta, or pi over 2 minus theta. It doesn't matter what the variable is, remember, for the angle. They can give you whatever variable they want to. It just has to happen that the two angles have to add up to 90. So that's why we have the 90 minus the angle A, because if I added A plus 90 minus A, I would end up with 90. So now we'll do a couple examples. So I want to determine the cofunction. So if I have the tangent of A is equal to 1/4. That means if I'm given tangent of A is equal to 1/4, I want to find the cofunction. So the cofunction I know is cotangent. And if I have angle A, that's what I'm going to have. 90 minus A will also have to equal 1/4. The cofunctions mean that they're complementary and they also equal the same value. A way to check yourself to make sure you're right, because most likely if you got a question like this, it'd be a multiple choice question. If you're given tangent of A is equal to 1/4, if you want to figure out what the angle is, whenever you want to figure out what the angle is, you always have to use the inverse function. That's the only way to figure out an angle, if you're given the ratio. So I want to do tangent inverse of 1/4. The inverse of a ratio will give you your angle. So if I type that in my calculator and make sure I'm in degrees, because that's what I'm finding is a degree measure, I get 14.03624347. If I wanted to make sure I was correct in stating the fact that the cotangent of 90 minus my angle A, which I just found out to be the 14.0362, is 1/4, I'd have to type it in my calculator to make sure I'm correct. And if you're typing in your calculator to make sure you're correct, you cannot round this. You have to use the exact value from the calculator. Otherwise, when you get your answer, it's going to be slightly off than 1/4. So instead of 0.25, it's going to be slightly less than that or slightly more than that, depending on how you rounded this answer. So if I type it in, I would type it in as the cotangent of 90 minus, and then I would use the answer button. Since you just figured out the inverse of tangent was 14.0362, you can use the answer button in your calculator, which is second and then the negative sign. And that should give you 0.25 if you entered it correctly. But remember, cotangent isn't in the calculator. You have to type in 1 divided by the tangent of 90 minus the answer. And that should give you the 0.25. If you wanted to make sure you're correct in stating that. We're going to do a couple more. So if I was given the cosine of theta is equal to 2/3, then what would the cofunction state? So I know the cofunction for cosine is sine. It's always going to be 90 minus your angle that you're given. So 90 minus theta is going to equal 2/3. It's always going to equal the same value for cofunctions. We'll do one for secant and cosecant. If cosecant of A equals 5/6, then what could I say about the cofunction? So I know the cofunction for cosecant is secant, and it's going to be 90 minus A, or I could say 2 pi divided, or 2 pi over 2 minus A, which is the same as saying 90 minus A, because pi over 2 is 90. And since the cosecant of A equals 5/6, the secant of pi over 2 minus A would have to equal 5/6. Okay, a couple more. That'd be more like a show your work type problem. They could give you something like secant of x plus 25 equals the cosecant of 4x minus 60, and they will tell you to solve for x. So since you know secant and cosecant are cofunctions, meaning they're two angles, x plus 25 and 4x minus 60 are complementary. So these two angles of the two cofunctions are complementary, meaning those two values are going to add up to 90. So if I want to solve it, I would have x plus 25 plus 4x minus 60 equals 90. Because I'm taking my two angles, whatever they may be, and adding them up, x plus 25 and 4x minus 60, and setting them equal to 90 because I know they're cofunctions, meaning they're complementary of each other. So if I add those up, I would get 5x minus 35 equals 90. Solving for x, I'd have to move the 35. So add 35 to both sides. So I get 5x equals 125. Divide by 5. X is equal to 25. Okay, we'll do one more, and then I want you to try a couple on your own. Okay, so if I want to solve for theta, I have the tangent of 3 theta equals the cotangent of 5 theta, not x, minus 30. So I know tangent and cotangent are cofunctions, meaning they're complementary. So I'm going to take those two angles, 3 theta plus 5 theta minus 30, and complementary means they add up to 90. So I want to simplify and solve for theta. So I'd get 8 theta minus 30 equals 90. Add 30 to both sides. 8 theta equals 120. Divide by 8. So I would get theta is equal to 40 degrees. Remember, you're finding an angle, so it would be a degrees for both of these. 25 degrees and 40 degrees. Now I want you to try some on your own. Okay, so for the first two, if you're given the statement sine of A is equal to negative 1/2, then what's the cofunction of that? And then if you're given tangent of 90 minus theta is equal to negative radical 3, then what's the cofunction of that? And then the next two I want you to do is solve for x for the cosecant of 4x minus 10 is equal to the secant of negative 2x plus 80. And last one, the sine of theta, or solve for theta, for the sine of 10 theta and then this cosine of 3 theta plus 25. If you were to ever mess up between thetas and x's and a's and b's, the variables, as long as your answer is correct, they won't take off points if you switch the variable on accident, just for future reference. And then we'll talk about this in class tomorrow.